Why do so many people choose the path of blind obedience, even when it means complicitly supporting injustices? Is courage a virtue reserved for only a few, or is there something deeply rooted in our society that discourages bravery? These questions touch on an uncomfortable truth. Most of us at some point prefer the comfort of silence over the burden of challenging imposed norms. Rollo, in his work on existential psychology, stated, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the capacity to act despite it." Yet, we live in an age where the fear of being excluded, ridiculed, or punished often outweighs our ability to act on principles. Instead of resisting, we conform. Instead of confronting, we obey. History is filled with examples of societies that succumbed to oppression because the majority of their members chose to avoid the discomfort of dissent. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, "The decline of courage is perhaps the most striking feature which an outside observer notices in the West today." In this video, we will explore the relationship between cowardice and the rise of authoritarianism, analyzing how blind obedience has become a pattern not only in totalitarian regimes, but also in modern democracies. Let us reflect on how courage can be not only an antidote, but also an indispensable virtue for preserving freedom. Why are we so prone to obedience even when the morality of our actions is questionable? This question was deeply explored by psychologist Stanley Milgram in his famous obedience experiment conducted in the 1960s. In this study, ordinary participants with no history of violent behavior were persuaded to administer electric shocks to another person simply because an authority figure instructed them to do so. The conclusion was chilling. Over 60% of participants followed orders to the highest shock levels, even as they heard cries of pain. This experiment revealed a harsh truth about human nature. The fear of challenging authority often outweighs concern for the consequences of our actions. Blind obedience, as Rollo described, is frequently mistaken for virtue. In times of crisis, we prefer to follow orders rather than face the uncertainties of independent thinking. This pattern is especially strong in societies that value conformity over authenticity. Moreover, the culture of fear and surveillance, intensified by social media, amplifies our reluctance to challenge norms. We live in a world where dissenting opinions are quickly punished with ostracism, while conformity is rewarded with acceptance and validation. As a result, many people choose the seemingly safe path of not questioning. They internalize the idea that being good means obeying, even if it requires ignoring their own conscience. This fear of dissent is also rooted in the human need for belonging. As psychologist Erich Fromm highlighted in Escape from Freedom, independence is perceived as a threat in a world where conformity is the norm. The pressure to fit in can be so overwhelming that we convince ourselves that our actions, even those that perpetuate injustice, are justified simply because everyone around us is doing the same. If obedience is so prevalent, what is the cost of resistance? And how can courage help us overcome the fear of challenging oppressive norms? What happens when a society prioritizes obedience over individual freedom? The answer lies in history. Mass conformity is the cornerstone of authoritarianism. Blind obedience, disguised as virtue, paves the way for governments to expand their control and suppress freedoms, often with the tacit or explicit support of the population. Authoritarian regimes throughout history, such as Nazism in Germany, Stalinism in the Soviet Union, or the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, began with small restrictions justified as necessary for the common good. Initially, few questioned them. There was a sense of security and conformity, and those who dared to resist were quickly demonized. As psychologist Ervin Staub explains in The Roots of Evil, repression is often rationalized by the majority as a fair measure against the enemies of progress. This dynamic unfolds similarly in modern societies, even in democracies. Today, conformity is reinforced not only by governments, but also by technological and cultural systems. Mass censorship and surveillance, legitimized by fear and insecurity, create an environment where questioning becomes dangerous. Social media plays a crucial role in this process, acting as amplifiers of propaganda and social pressure. The driving force behind authoritarianism is the idea that the collective knows what's best. This belief justifies the suppression of individual freedoms in favor of a supposed greater good. However, this logic has devastating consequences. When the majority accepts the repression of a minority, The continuum of destruction described by Staub is set in motion. Small acts of exclusion, such as bans from public spaces or censorship of ideas, evolve into systematic repression and eventually institutionalized violence. However, authoritarianism does not thrive solely because of its leaders. It depends on a population that, out of fear or convenience, chooses not to resist. This pathological conformity, as described by Rollo, is the true danger. It turns society into fertile ground for tyranny, where people relinquish their moral responsibility in exchange for a false sense of security. But if conformity is the root of authoritarianism, how can we break this cycle? The answer lies in courage, a virtue many consider forgotten, yet one that remains essential for freedom. If conformity is the foundation of authoritarianism, courage is its antithesis. But what does it really mean to have moral courage? Rushworth Kidder, in his book Moral Courage, describes courage as the ability to face danger out of a commitment to higher values. It is a type of bravery that goes beyond physical courage. It is the willingness to endure criticism, rejection, and even retaliation to stand up for what is right. However, moral courage is a virtue in decline. In our society, the tendency toward conformity and the fear of being different stifle the expression of independent ideas. Cancel culture, digital surveillance, and fear of professional repercussions are just some of the barriers that prevent people from acting in line with their convictions. Viktor Pestov, a young man who stood up to the Soviet regime, is an inspiring example of moral courage. He knew that challenging the status quo could destroy his life, and he did it anyway. He founded the underground group Free Russia and published texts exposing the regime's lies, even knowing that his freedom and safety were at stake. When arrested and sentenced to a labor camp, Pestov reflected, "I did what I had to do. I couldn't stay silent." This kind of courage is not just an individual act, but a movement that can transform entire societies. Carl Jung referred to people like Pestov as the true leaders of humanity, those who, even in the face of extreme danger, challenge tyranny. But like any virtue, courage must be cultivated. It does not arise spontaneously in a society that values obedience over authenticity. Rollo identified that modern courage is defined by the ability to act against the collective, even if it means losing friends, status, or comfort. He explained, "The hallmark of courage in our age of conformity is the ability to sustain our own convictions. This ability, however, demands more than bravery. It requires a profound connection to ethical principles and a clear vision that the cost of blind obedience is the loss of freedom and dignity." But courage is not just about grand heroic gestures. It manifests in small, everyday actions, speaking out against injustices at work, refusing to follow immoral norms, or even protecting those who are victims of discrimination. Each act of resistance, no matter how small it may seem, is a step toward preserving freedom. If moral courage is the key to resisting authoritarianism, how can we cultivate it in a world so hostile to dissent? Cultivating courage in a society that glorifies obedience may seem like a monumental challenge, but it is precisely in times of oppression that courage becomes most necessary. Moral courage does not arise by chance. It is built through conscious choices and a commitment to values that transcend fear and social conventions. One of the first steps in cultivating courage is developing critical awareness. This involves questioning norms, laws, and prevailing narratives rather than passively accepting them. As Rollo stated, the opposite of courage in our age is automatic conformity. This means that, above all, we must be willing to think for ourselves, even when our ideas challenge popular consensus. Another fundamental step in rejecting conformity is fostering communities that value freedom and independent thinking. Authoritarianism thrives when people are isolated and fear being seen as different. Finding allies, even if they are few, can strengthen individual resilience. These groups serve as networks of moral and psychological support, helping individuals resist conformity. Finally, it is crucial to accept that courage involves risk. There is no way to challenge oppressive systems without facing discomfort. However, as Rushworth Kidder observes, where there is no danger, there is no courage. This acceptance transforms fear into fuel for action. Understanding that freedom and justice require sacrifices can be liberating as it connects us to something greater than ourselves. Rejecting conformity is not easy, but it is necessary. Courage not only helps us preserve our dignity, but also creates the conditions for others to be inspired and do the same. Every act of courage, no matter how small, weakens the cycle of blind obedience and makes room for a freer and more just future. Not every revolution begins with cries in the streets or grand public declarations. Often, real change is silent, built through everyday acts that may seem insignificant, but hold the power to alter the course of history. These small acts of courage, when combined, create an immeasurable force capable of challenging even the most oppressive regimes. Imagine someone in the workplace who decides to question an unjust policy, or a student in a classroom dominated by conformity who raises their hand to voice an opinion that could spark controversy. These are simple gestures, yet they break the cycle of silence and inspire others to do the same. As Margaret Mead once said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Silent courage also reveals itself in actions like educating oneself about historical injustices, financially supporting causes that challenge oppression, or even refusing to participate in practices that contradict one's values. While these gestures may not receive the spotlight, they have a profound impact, especially when they serve as examples for others to follow. The secret of this silent revolution is that it operates from the ground up, challenging the authority of systems that rely on collective passivity. It is a form of resistance that values individual integrity and community connection. When each person commits to living according to their principles, no matter how small their actions may seem, an irreversible wave of change begins to unfold. This revolution also teaches us that courage is not about winning great battles immediately, but about planting seeds that will bloom at the right time. Gandhi's peaceful resistance, the civil rights movement in the United States, and the silent protests of dissidents in totalitarian regimes are historical examples of how seemingly small acts can spark waves of global transformation. We live in an era where the pressure to conform is constant. Social media amplifies conformist voices while suppressing dissent. Yet even in this environment, the silent revolution continues. Every honest post, every difficult conversation, and every choice to live authentically is an act of courage that, when combined with many others, redefines what is possible. In the end, the true revolution begins within each of us. The commitment to moral courage in our daily lives is the foundation for a world where freedom, justice, and truth can thrive. As Solzhenitsyn said, "A world of courageous men is a world of hope. May we be the bearers of that hope, one small act at a time." Moral courage is a rare but indispensable virtue, especially in times when conformity seems to be the easiest and safest path. Throughout this video, we explore how blind obedience fuels authoritarianism, and how individual acts of resistance can become the first step toward transforming an entire society. Whether through the story of Victor Pestov, the teachings of Rollo, or the warnings of thinkers like Ayn Rand, it becomes clear that freedom can only be preserved by those willing to challenge the status quo and take risks in the name of higher values. These individuals, by rejecting the comfort of obedience, take on the responsibility of building a more just world. Now it is up to each of us to reflect. How can we act with courage in our own lives? How can we become agents of change in a world that often rewards submission? Courage does not have to be grand to be meaningful. Every small act of resistance, whether it's an honest word, a gesture of support for the oppressed, or the decision to question an injustice, contributes to the preservation of our freedom. We would like to thank you for watching until the end, for being part of this reflection, and hopefully this transformation. It is in moments like this that we can begin to cultivate the courage needed to face the challenges of our time. Leave a comment sharing how you perceive moral courage in your life, share an experience where you chose to stand firm, or how you believe we can strengthen this virtue in our society. If this video inspired you in any way, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with those who might also need to hear this message. And of course, stay tuned for upcoming videos where we will continue to explore topics that challenge our beliefs and help us see the world more clearly. Who knows what thought-provoking philosophical question we will tackle next? A mystery that will only be revealed at the right time. Thank you for your presence, reflection, and courage. See you soon.